All right, so get ready because today we're going deep, really deep into metaphysics.
Nice.
We're talking properties in particular, the
Yeah.
fundamental building blocks of reality,
Well,
at least according to this book,
Yeah.
Metaphysics, the Fundamentals by Koons and Pickavance.
Oh, right.
I'm excited. It's kind of like we're
Yeah.
reverse engineering the universe,
Uh-huh.
taking a peek under the hood to see what makes everything tick.
Well, and what I think is so fascinating about metaphysics is it's not just this abstract
Right.
philosophical puzzle.
Right.
It grapples with these questions that we all ponder,
Mm-hmm.
even if we don't realize it.
Totally.
Like, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah.
What does it mean for something to actually be a thing?
Yeah.
To have properties, to change over time?
It's like philosophy begins in wonder, right?
so
We
how-
look around and just marvel at the sheer existence of everything.
Yeah.
So how do we move from that sense of wonder?
Right. To actual answers.
Mm.
Like, where do we even begin?
The book takes us on this really interesting historical tour of how philosophers have tried to tackle these fundamental questions.
Yeah.
We start with Descartes,
Okay.
who was obsessed with certainty, like finding that bedrock of certainty.
Yeah.
He thought, what's the one thing I can be absolutely sure of?
Okay.
And he landed on, I think, therefore I am.
So my thoughts
Right.
create the world.
Well,
That's a lot of power.
not quite.
Okay.
But Descartes' focus on the mind led to idealism.
Okay.
The idea that reality is ultimately mental or
Got it.
spiritual in nature.
Okay.
Then comes Hume, the ultimate skeptic.
Okay.
He said, hold on,
Yeah.
if we can't observe it
Right.
directly,
Okay.
we have no reason to believe it exists.
So he'd be skeptical of those abstract realms where
Absolutely.
properties supposedly exist.
Totally skeptical.
Hume was all about grounding knowledge
Uh-huh.
in experience.
Okay.
And then Kant kind of blew everything up with his Copernican revolution.
Okay.
He said, we don't just passively perceive reality.
Okay.
Our minds
Yeah.
actively shape how we experience it.
Okay. My head is already spinning a bit. So are we
Yeah.
stuck in our own...
Well, not necessarily. Kant's point was we understand things
Yeah.
as they appear to us,
Okay.
filtered through
Yeah.
our mental categories,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean there's nothing real out there.
Okay, so lots of different perspectives. The book seems to advocate for weighing
Yeah.
the evidence, the arguments, to find the best explanation, right?
Exactly.
No easy answers here.
There are not.
And in the 20th century,
Yeah.
there was a resurgence of interest in metaphysics,
There what?
using logic, science, and language to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
That's where...
This deep dive really begins.
Okay,
So let's unpack one of those key concepts.
okay.
The book talks about truth makers.
Yeah.
So what exactly is a truth maker?
It's this really simple idea.
Okay.
If something is true,
Mm-hmm.
there must be something in the world
Yeah.
that makes it true.
Okay.
Like, think about the statement,
All right.
the sky is blue.
Yeah.
What makes that statement true? Well, the actual blueness of the sky.
It's true because the sky is blue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the truth maker is the thing in the world
Yeah.
that corresponds to the true statement.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, there's debate about whether truth makers are the sentences themselves or the underlying propositions they express.
Okay.
The book leans towards propositions.
Okay.
Imagine saying it's snowing
Yeah.
in English, French, Japanese. The truth is the same.
Even though the sentences are different.
So the proposition captures the truth,
Right.
independent of language.
Yeah.
But what if the statement is about something that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Like, there are no unicorns.
Okay.
Does that need a truth maker?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Truth maker maximalism says every truth
Yeah.
needs a truth maker, even negative ones.
Okay.
So that leads to some strange consequences.
Well, like...
Needing truth makers for the non-existence of a golden mountain,
Okay.
a unicorn,
Uh-huh.
pretty much everything else we can imagine that doesn't exist.
That seems
Yeah.
a bit excessive, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Like an infinite number of truth makers.
Right.
Just to account for things that aren't.
Right. And so that's why
Fair.
some philosophers favor
Yeah.
atomic truth maker theory,
Okay.
which says only fundamental truths get dedicated truth makers.
Okay.
So for negative truths,
Uh-huh.
it simply relies on the absence of a truth maker
Okay.
for the corresponding positive statement.
Okay.
So instead of a separate truth maker
Yeah.
for there are no unicorns,
Right.
You just point to the lack of a truth maker.
Right.
For there are unicorns.
Okay, that's a bit more streamlined.
It is.
But doesn't this whole truth maker business kind of assume that is true?
Yeah.
Actually expresses a property.
Well, yeah, and so
that's not the case.
That's where deflationism comes in.
Sorry. Okay.
It suggests is true.
Yeah.
Doesn't express a property.
Okay.
It's simply a way of endorsing a claim.
Okay.
So snow is white is true because snow is white.
Yeah.
No need for this separate entity to make the statement true.
So deflationism kind of sidesteps the whole truth maker debate by saying truth is grounded in reality itself.
Exactly.
Okay. But does that mean truth is relative?
Yes.
Like, what if two people see white differently?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that deflationists have to grapple with.
Okay.
They'd probably argue that while perceptions of color might vary slightly, there's still an objective fact about the reflectance properties of snow that make the statement snow is white true.
Okay, so we've explored truth makers and how they might ground reality. But reality isn't static, is it?
No, it's not.
Things change.
Right.
And that brings us to another key concept.
Okay.
Causation.
Right.
Why do things happen?
Yeah.
Why does anything change at all?
It's just this fundamental observation, isn't it?
Yeah.
The world is in constant flux.
Yeah.
And to understand that flux, we need to understand causation.
Okay.
It's not just events randomly following each other.
Right.
There's a non-accidental connection between cause and effect.
Right.
Causation is at the heart of how we understand knowledge.
Okay.
Meaning pretty much all of science.
It's not just describing what happens. It's about understanding why it happens in a way that lets us make predictions and learn from experience.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Now, the book outlines 4 interconnected phenomena related to causation.
Right.
First, we have causal dispositions, the inherent tendencies of things to behave in certain ways.
Right.
So glass has a disposition to break when struck.
So it's not just about what does happen, but also about what could happen under certain circumstances.
Exactly. We call those could statements counterfactual conditionals.
Okay.
Like, if I were to strike this glass, it would break.
Okay.
Then, of course, we have the laws of nature, which describe regularities and patterns in how things behave.
Like gravity, always bringing us back down to Earth.
Yep. And finally, we have the actual patterns of change that we observe in the world around us.
Okay.
So the big question is, which of these 4 is the most fundamental?
Okay.
Where does causation really reside?
So we've got dispositions, counterfactuals, laws, and patterns.
Right.
Which one is the ultimate source of causation?
It's a real...
It sounds like a real philosophical
It is. The book explores 2 major contenders.
Okay.
Neo-Humeism and Powerism.
Okay.
Neo-Humeism takes this minimalist approach and says causation is ultimately just about patterns of succession that we observe.
Right. So it's all about regularities that we perceive.
Right. And that leads to some potential problems.
Oh, okay.
It makes causation seem very human-centered, as if it only exists because we happen to see these patterns. It also struggles to explain how we can make predictions about the future based on past experiences, the classic problem of induction.
Right. So if causation is just about our perception of patterns, how can we be sure those patterns will continue?
Exactly.
What's the alternative?
Powerism.
Okay.
It offers a more intuitive view.
Okay.
It says causation is grounded in the inherent powers of things.
Okay.
So a glass has the power to break. Fire has the power to burn.
Okay.
This approach fits well with our scientific understanding of the world.
Okay.
We discover these powers through experimentation and observation.
So instead of just observing patterns, Powerism says the world is actively doing things.
Exactly.
Right.
Things have an intrinsic nature that makes them behave in certain ways.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean things are constantly exerting their powers. Like the glass doesn't have to break.
Right.
Its power to break is only activated under certain conditions.
That makes sense.
But I imagine there are some challenges to Powerism as well.
Of course.
One challenge is the potential for an explosion of powers.
Okay.
Does every little thing need its own unique set of powers. That can make the theory very complex.
Okay.
And then there's the question of how active and passive powers relate to each other.
Okay.
Like fire has the active power to burn,
yeah,
but wood has the passive power to be burned.
Right, right.
Are these two separate powers?
Okay.
How do they interact?
Those are some tricky questions.
They are.
It sounds like both Neo-Humeism
Right.
and Powerism have their strengths and weaknesses.
You do.
This deep dive is already making me rethink some basic assumptions about how the world works.
For sure.
Okay, we've covered truth makers and causation.
Right.
Now let's get to the heart of the matter, properties.
Let's do it. Building on our exploration of causation, we can dive into the world of properties.
Okay.
Things have features, right?
Right.
Redness, roundness, being a cat.
Yeah.
These are all properties.
Yeah.
And they play this crucial role
Yeah.
in how we understand and describe the world.
I gotta admit, I never really thought about why we need the concept of a property.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, properties are essential for explaining character and similarity.
Okay.
You can say two apples are both red because they share the property of redness.
Right.
Without properties, we'd just be left with this world of
yeah,
fundamentally different things
right,
with no way to account for their resemblances.
Okay, so properties are like the common threads that weave the tapestry of reality.
Exactly.
Connecting things and giving them a shared identity.
Yeah.
But this raises the question,
right,
do properties really exist out there in the world?
That's a great question.
Or are they just convenient ways for us to categorize things?
That's the heart of the debate between realism and nominalism about properties.
Yeah.
Realism is kind of the intuitive view.
Okay.
It says properties actually exist independent of our minds.
Okay.
So redness exists whether or not there's a mind around to perceive it.
Okay. That seems straightforward enough.
Yeah.
What's the problem with that view?
Well, one challenge is that realism can lead to some pretty abstract concepts.
Okay.
If redness is a real property, where does it exist?
Yeah.
Is there some realm of redness somewhere?
A realm of redness?
Yeah.
That sounds a bit out there.
It does a little bit.
Even for me.
Yeah.
And what about the relationships between properties and the things they describe?
Right. That leads to another problem for realism.
Okay.
The Bradley regress.
Okay.
Imagine a red apple.
Okay.
Realism says the apple has the property of redness.
Yeah.
But then you need another entity.
Okay.
A relation of exemplification.
Okay.
To connect the apple to the redness.
So it's not enough to just say the apple is red.
Exactly.
You need something to explain.
You need something else.
How the apple and the redness are linked together.
Exactly. But then you might ask, how is the relation of exemplification itself related to the apple and the redness?
Right.
Do you need another relation to explain that?
Oh, wow.
And so on ad infinitum.
So it's relations.
There's this infinite chain of relations.
All the way down. So is realism about properties doomed?
It's a tough one.
Because of this infinite regress.
Yeah. Some realists just bite the bullet and accept the infinite chain. Others try to find ways to stop the regress.
Yeah.
Maybe by positing a special kind of relation
that
doesn't require further explanation.
But
it remains a thorny issue.
All right, so realism has its challenges.
Sure. What about nominalism?
Okay, so nominalism tries to get rid of properties as separate entities altogether.
So they're saying properties don't exist at all.
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
There are different flavors of nominalism, each with its own way of dealing with properties. Extreme nominalism says things are just fundamentally different. There is no shared redness between two apples. It just looks similar to us.
But that seems wrong, doesn't it?
It does, right?
We can clearly see that things do share features.
Exactly. And that's why,
Extreme nominalism isn't very popular.
Okay.
Other types of nominalism, like class nominalism, try to explain similarity by saying properties are just sets of things that resemble each other. So redness would be the set of all red things.
So instead of redness being the separate abstract entity, it's just a way of grouping together all the red things in the world.
Exactly.
But what if one of those red things ceases to exist? Does the class and therefore the property of redness vanish as well?
That's one of the challenges that class nominalism faces. It has a hard time accounting for the fact that properties seem to exist independently of the particular things that exemplify them. Another type of nominalism.
Okay.
Resemblance nominalism.
Okay.
Tries to ground similarity in fundamental resemblance relations. So two apples are similar.
Yeah.
Because they fundamentally resemble each other.
Right.
But there's no redness floating out there connecting them.
So it's like saying they just are similar, and that's all we need to say.
Yeah.
But doesn't that just push the problem back a step?
It does.
Why do they resemble each other in the first place?
Exactly. And that's the major challenge for all forms of nominalism.
Okay.
They struggle to account for shared features without ultimately bringing properties back into the picture in some way.
So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Realism has issues with abstract entities and infinite regresses.
Right.
While nominalism has trouble explaining similarity without resorting to properties.
Yeah.
What a conundrum.
It is a puzzle.
Okay. We've wrestled with properties.
Yes.
Now let's turn to their counterparts.
Right.
The things that have properties, particulars.
Right.
We can point to objects in the world.
Yeah.
Trees, tables, planets.
Sure.
But what makes them individual things?
That's a great question.
With the unique identity.
It's easy to take that concept of a thing for granted.
Right.
But when you really start to examine it closely, it becomes surprisingly slippery.
Okay.
One of the central challenges is understanding how particulars persist through time and change.
Right.
Think about a tree growing new branches. Is it still the same tree?
Yeah.
How do we account for that kind of transformation while maintaining the tree's unique identity?
It's like the ship of Theseus, right?
Exactly.
If you gradually replace all the parts of a ship,
Yeah.
is it still the same ship?
Right.
It seems like at some point it should become a different ship altogether.
And this gets at the heart of how we think about particulars.
Okay.
Are they defined by their parts, their properties, something else entirely?
Yeah.
The book explores 4 main views on what particulars.
Okay.
We already touched on extreme nominalism, which says particulars have no internal structure, just a collection of features.
Yeah.
But that view struggles to explain how a particular could maintain a consistent identity.
Right. It's like saying a tree is just a jumble of greenness and tallness and leafiness with no underlying unity.
Right.
What are the other contenders?
Well, there are bundle theories,
okay,
which come in a couple of flavors.
All right.
They say particulars are essentially bundles of properties, kind of like a bouquet of flowers.
Right.
One version, trope bundle theory, proposes that each particular has its own unique set of properties called tropes.
Okay.
Like imagine tropes are like the individual stickers that make up a sticker collection.
All right.
Each sticker is unique, but together they form a picture.
Okay, so instead of sharing a universal redness, each red apple would have its own unique trope of redness.
Precisely.
Like a personalized redness just for that apple.
Exactly.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that lead to an incredibly complex world?
It would.
With a unique trope for every property of every particular.
It would indeed.
Okay.
Trope bundle theory has to grapple with the potential for a vast and complex ontology.
Right.
But proponents argue that it offers a more intuitive way to think about the relationship between particulars and their properties. After all, we experience each apple as having its own unique qualities.
Right, that's true.
Right.
No two apples are exactly alike.
But how does trope bundle theory handle properties that are clearly shared, like the roundness of 2 different apples? Right. They might say that particulars have tropes that closely resemble each other.
Okay.
So 2 round apples wouldn't share the exact same trope of roundness.
Okay.
But their respective tropes would be so similar as to be virtually indistinguishable.
So it's like saying they have almost identical roundness tropes.
Yeah.
It seems like a bit of a fudge,
Man.
like the theory word.
Yeah. Are there any other issues with trope bundle theory?
Are there?
There are.
Okay.
For one thing, there's a distinction between modifier tropes and modular tropes.
Okay.
Modifier tropes are like traditional properties.
Okay.
They modify the particular.
Okay.
Like saying an apple is red.
Okay.
But modular tropes are more like building blocks that constitute the particular.
All right.
Imagine a Lego apple.
Okay.
Each Lego brick would be a modular trope.
Okay, so modifier tropes describe modular tropes construct.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see where this is going.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, substances are just bundles of modular tropes. Can they even have character in the traditional sense?
Right.
It's like saying the Lego apple isn't really red.
Right.
It just has red Lego bricks.
Yeah, that seems to miss something essential about what it means for an apple to be red.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if substances can only have character based on their constituent tropes, then you run into the problem of thick character.
Okay.
Things in the world seem to have multiple dimensions of character.
Right.
An apple is red, round, sweet, and so on.
Right.
But if each modular trope only represents a single aspect, how can you combine them to get that richness of character?
It seems like modular trope bundle theory might be sacrificing too much to maintain a simple view of particulars.
Right. And that leads us to the other main type of bundle theory.
Yeah.
Classical bundle theory.
Okay.
Which goes back to the idea of universals.
Okay.
Remember, universals are properties shared by multiple particulars.
Yeah.
So instead of each apple having its own redness trope,
all
red apples would exemplify the universal redness.
Okay, back to universals.
Get to universals.
But doesn't that bring back all those issues?
It does.
We talked about earlier, like the Bradley regress and the need for a mysterious realm where universals exist.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Classical bundle theory has to grapple with those same metaphysical challenges.
Okay.
And it also has to be careful not to make its theory of universals too abundant.
Okay.
Otherwise, you end up with particulars that are incredibly complex, exemplifying an infinite number of universals.
So that's a balancing act between explaining shared properties and avoiding an overly complex and potentially incomprehensible reality.
Exactly.
What are some of the specific objections to classical bundle theory?
Well, one big challenge is the idea that if particulars are just bangles of universals, then how can two particulars that exemplify the exact same set of universals be different? Imagine two apples that are perfectly identical in every way. Same shape, size, color, taste, everything. Are there really two distinct apples?
Right.
Or just one apple appearing in two places?
That's a mind bender.
It is?
It seems like if they're identical in every way, there should be the same thing.
Right.
But that seems to contradict our basic intuition that each apple is a unique individual.
This is related to the identity of indiscernibles.
Okay.
A principle that says if two things have all the same properties, they must be the same thing.
Okay.
Classical bundle theory has a hard time accounting for this.
Okay.
Some philosophers try to solve this problem by invoking identity properties, unique properties that can only be possessed by one particular. For example, being this apple would be an identity property.
Okay. But then the question becomes, how do you even define these identity properties without running into circularity?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, it seems like we're going down this rabbit hole of increasingly abstract concepts.
Yeah.
Okay, so classical bundle theory faces this dilemma of either violating the identity of indiscernibles or resorting to potentially circular identity properties. What's the last theory we need to consider?
The final contender is substratum theory, which is perhaps the most philosophically challenging of them all. It claims that there's this bare, featureless substratum underlying every particular something that holds the properties and gives the particular its unique identity.
Right, but we talked about how that substratum is kind of this mysterious entity that we can't really define or even imagine. If it's completely featureless, how can it even do anything? How can it differentiate one particular from another?
Those are great questions. One problem is that the substratum seems to do very little explanatory work. It's just this inert something that sits there and supposedly provides unity to the particular. But if it doesn't have any properties of its own, how can it even interact with the properties?
Right.
It's supposed to be holding...
It's like saying the blank canvas is somehow responsible for the painting,
right,
even though it doesn't contribute any of the colors or brushstrokes.
Exactly.
And that leads to further puzzles.
Right.
If the substratum is completely featureless, how can it differentiate one particular from another?
Exactly.
What makes this substratum different from that substratum?
Right.
It seems like we're back to the problem of the identity of indiscernibles.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
So we've got four contenders.
Yep.
Extreme nominalism, bundle theories, both trope and classical,
right,
and substratum theory.
Yep.
And it sounds like each of them has its own set of strengths and weaknesses.
They do.
Is there any consensus?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
The nature of particulars remains one of
the most hotly debated topics in metaphysics.
Okay.
And these debates have far-reaching implications because they tie into how we understand persistence through time, change, and even personal identity.
Yeah.
It's pretty profound stuff.
It's amazing how even the simplest concepts,
I know,
like what is a thing, can lead to such profound philosophical mysteries.
They do.
Speaking of persistence through time, I'm curious about how these different theories handle the idea that things change while remaining the same. For example, we talked about a tree growing new branches. How do particulars survive through these kinds of transformations?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another major debate in metaphysics, the debate between perdurantism and endurantism.
Okay. Those are some new terms. Break it down for me.
Okay.
What do perdurantism and endurantism say about how things persist through time?
Perdurantism takes this four-dimensional view of reality.
Okay.
It says that particulars are extended through time.
Okay.
Kind of like a long worm made up of temporal parts.
Okay.
Instead of thinking of a tree as a single enduring entity, perdurantism says is more like a series of tree slices, each existing at a specific point in time.
So each temporal part or time slice is a complete entity in itself, and the whole tree is made up of all these time slices strung together.
Exactly.
It's like a flip book of a tree's existence.
This allows perdurantism to explain change very easily. If a tree grows new branches, it's simply because a later time slice of the tree has the property of having branches, while an earlier time slice didn't. There's no need to explain how this single unchanging tree somehow acquired new properties.
So for perdurantism, the identity of the tree is tied to its specific configuration of parts at a given time.
Exactly.
It's less about an enduring essence and more about this continuous evolution.
Exactly.
But this raises an interesting question. What happens to the original tree in this scenario? If each new time slice results in a slightly different tree, does the original one simply cease to exist?
That's a great point.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right to say that the original tree just vanishes. It seems like it should still be somewhere. Even if it's made up of different, you know, whatever. At a different time slice.
This is where perdurantists might introduce this idea of counterpart relations. They might say that the original tree has a counterpart relation to later versions. Even though they're not strictly identical. It's a way of acknowledging a connection across time. A kind of lineage without insisting on absolute sameness.
Okay, so it's like saying they're related, but not the same individual. I can see how that helps preserve the intuition that the original tree doesn't just disappear into thin air. But how does endurantism approach this?
Endurantism faces a tougher challenge. If the tree is wholly present at each moment, and its identity isn't tied to its specific parts, then it seems like it should remain the same tree.
But doesn't that defy common sense?
Well, it feels like it does.
At some point, it just feels wrong to call it the same tree.
This is where endurantists might appeal to the idea of essential properties. Maybe there's some core essence of treeness that endures through all the changes, even if we can't define it precisely. Or perhaps the tree's identity is tied to its function.
Right.
As long as it can still, photosynthesize and grow.
Right.
It's the same tree, regardless of its material composition.
So endurantism has to find a way to ground the tree's identity in something other than its parts.
Right.
Something that persists through change.
Exactly.
It seems like a lot of work.
It does.
So we've been talking about perdurantism and endurantism.
We have.
These two contrasting views on how things persist through time.
Right. Really making me question of assumptions.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, are there any real-world scenarios besides, a growing tree that could help us test which theory makes more sense?
There are.
Okay.
Thought experiments, like the classic ship of Theseus, can really put these theories to the test and expose their strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
Remember, the ship of Theseus is that scenario where you gradually replace all the planks of a ship over time.
It always messes with my head. It seems like at some point, with enough replacements, it shouldn't be the same ship anymore.
Yeah.
But then again, where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this thought experiment highlights the fundamental differences between perdurantism and endurantism.
Okay.
Perdurantism, with its focus on
temporal parts, offers a pretty straightforward solution.
Okay.
The ship of Theseus isn't the same ship after all the replacements.
Okay.
Each new plank creates a slightly different version of the ship.
Right.
A new temporal part in the four-dimensional worm of the ship's existence.
So for perdurantism, the identity of the ship is tied to its specific configuration of parts at a given time.
Exactly.
It's less about an enduring essence and more about a continuous evolution.
Precisely.
But this raises an interesting question.
Yeah.
What happens to the original ship in this scenario?
Exactly.
If each replacement results in a new ship, does the original one simply cease to exist?
That's a great point.
It doesn't feel right to say
it doesn't.
The original ship just vanishes.
Right.
It seems like it should still be somewhere. Yeah.
Even if it's made up of different planks now.
Right. This is where perdurantists might introduce the idea of counterpart relations. They might say the original ship has a counterpart relation to the later versions. Yeah. Even though they're not strictly identical, it's a way of acknowledging a connection across time, a kind of lineage, without insisting on absolute sameness.
Okay, so it's like saying they're related, but not the same individual.
Exactly.
I can see how that helps preserve that intuition that the original ship doesn't just
poof,
disappear into thin air.
Right.
But how does endurantism...
Okay, so endurantism faces a tougher challenge here.
Okay.
If the ship is wholly present at each moment and its identity isn't tied to its specific parts,
then it seems like it should remain the same ship.
Right.
Even with all the replacements.
But doesn't that defy common sense?
Yeah.
At some point, it just feels wrong to call it the same ship.
This is where endurantism might appeal to the idea of essential properties.
Oh, okay.
Maybe there's some core essence of shipness that endures through all the changes.
Right.
Even if we can't define it precisely.
Okay.
Or maybe the ship's identity is tied to its function.
Okay.
As long as it can still sail, it's the same ship.
Right.
Regardless of its material composition.
So endurantism has to find a way to ground the ship's identity in something other than its parts. Something that persists through change.
Exactly.
Seems like a lot of work.
It is.
Are there any other thought experiments
yes, there are.
that really put these theories through the ringer?
Cases of fission and fusion are particularly tricky.
All right.
Imagine a simple organism like an amoeba that splits into two identical copies.
Okay.
Which one is the original?
Whoa. Right.
That's a tough one.
It is.
It seems like they both have an equal claim.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Perdurantism, again, with this emphasis on temporal parts, would say that neither is the original.
Okay.
They're both distinct individuals that share a common temporal origin.
Okay.
Like branches splitting off from a tree trunk.
Okay, so they each have their own four-dimensional worm of existence starting from the point of the split.
Yeah.
But what about endurantism?
Endurantism has to figure out if one of the copies is the real continuation of the original or if the original ceased to exist altogether.
At the moment of the split.
Right.
Neither option is particularly satisfying.
It's like these thought experiments are designed to expose the cracks in these theories.
They are.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Okay.
These puzzles force us to confront the limits of our intuition about identity and what it means for a thing to remain the same through change.
This whole deep dive has been an incredible journey.
Yeah.
We've gone from the basic building blocks of reality to some mind-bending thought experiments that really challenge how we think about the world. It's amazing how even the simplest concepts like thing and time are far more complex than we might imagine.
And that's the beauty of metaphysics.
Yeah.
It challenges us to question our assumptions, explore alternative possibilities, and appreciate the mystery and wonder that lie at the heart of existence.
Well said.
Thank you.
I'm leaving this deep dive with a sense of awe and a renewed appreciation for the incredible complexity of the universe.
It is complex.
And it's made me realize that there's always more to learn.
There is.
More to explore and more to ponder.
Exactly.
Thanks for being such a fantastic guide through these philosophical waters.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
And remember, the deep dive doesn't end here.
Right.
Keep questioning.
Yeah.
Keep exploring. And keep wondering.
Well said. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.